Hi everyone. In previous sessions, we have started with framework development for Rest Assured. So far, we have created property file. We have also seen how to read data from property file by using config reader class. Then we have also created user CRUD service class in our last session. So user CRUD service class will contain all the methods of create user, get user, update user, delete user. It will get the information like base URI, headers, token, body, request type. So whatever information which is required for calling that API, it will get those information and it will call that API and it will return the response for create user, get user, update user and delete user. We have also created Pojo class in our last session. Pojo class is used to develop a request payload for post and put request. In today's session, we will see how to create actual test class. Test class means it will contain actual test cases in which we will perform assertions and validations. And the user service class which we have created, we will create the object and we will call those method in our test cases class. So overall in design, if you see today we will focus on this test cases class. In test cases class, we will create test cases for create user, get created user, update user and delete user. So we will focus on first four test cases. So these are the test cases which we have decided to automate in our framework. We will complete this 1, 2, 3 and 4 test cases today. First one is to verify creation of new user. Second test case is for verifying newly created user by calling its information with its ID, which is a get type of request. Then we will focus on updation of information of new user by using put request. And at last, we will delete that user by using its user ID. So we will write actual test class today and in which we will create four test cases. And in these four test cases, we will use user CRUD service class object to call the methods which are present in the user CRUD service, because those methods will actually perform the API calling operation. And in test case, we will just perform assertions and validations. So first, on high level, let's understand what is the purpose and role of test cases class, which is separate from user CRUD service class. So as I explained earlier, test class will contain test methods that invoke CRUD operations from service classes. So if you see our last session, we have created this user CRUD service.java class. So if you see this class, it contains four methods for create user. In the create user method, we are passing user Pojo class object, that is basically Pojo object. This Pojo object will contain all the information about request payload. For example, if you are using create user API, this is the request payload which we want to send. So all this information will be passed via this Pojo object. We are also fetching base URI from property file, authorization token in headers, content type. Inside the body, we are passing this request payload. of Pojo object, and we are calling post request, and we are appending this slash users endpoint, so that it will call the create users API with all the details, and it will return the response. So this is a return response. It will return this entire response type of object. And now let's create a user CRUD test class. So now we will create user service, not user service but actual test class. So let's create a new class. So let's create a new class called as user CRUD test. So where we can create the test cases now. So in api.services we have created user CRUD service.java inside the test package. So if you see inside the test Java, we have com.api.tests package. Inside this, I am going to create one new class, user CRUD test. So this is actual test class which we have created. So what is the purpose and role? It will focus on test logic and assertions rather than API implementation details. API implementation details we have already created in user CRUD service class. So user test class will now act as bridge between test scenarios and actual API service layer. And what are the responsibilities of this class? It will call the service methods which we have created in user CRUD service class. By using test class, we will call this create user, get user, update user and delete user methods directly with test data which we want to pass. Then those methods will return the response. So in test class, we will capture the API responses and we will validate the status codes, headers and response bodies, etc. We can also perform assertions on response fields to ensure that expected behavior. For example, in test class, when we call this create user API, we can now check different parameters like 201 API response is coming or not. Inside the response, we can verify whether name is correctly coming or not. So whatever validations we want to put, we can put those in test class. We can also perform logging and reporting the test results that we will see in coming sessions, where we will add loggers, extend report, and we can log those information for traceability. What is the test method structure? So whatever test methods we are going to create, that will contain some test data. We will also pass Pojo objects. Then we will execute. We will call the service methods and capture the response object. Then we will perform assertions. We will validate the status code, response fields and business logic, etc. As I said, we can perform different type of status code assertions like verifying HTTP response codes. So whatever response codes are coming from the response, whether it is 200, 201, 400, we can validate in our test classes. We can also perform response body assertions. So whatever response we are getting, we can validate individual fields using JSON path or Pojo deserialization. We will use assert equals to perform field value assertions that will compare actual versus expected values. And what are some best practices? So whenever we are writing the test class, we should keep test methods focused on only one test scenario per method. So for every test case, we will create different test method. To verify creation of new user, we will create test create user method. To verify get method, we will create test get user method. Similarly, for update and delete as well, we will create separate test cases. So ideally, we should always separate out the test cases for each scenario. We should use descriptive test method names. So whenever you are writing test method, just by reading the test method name, we should understand what that test case is about. For example, if it's for creation, then we should name it as test create user. It should be simple and easily understood. We should always separate positive and negative test cases. So we will separate out. We will write all the positive test cases in one class and couple of negative test cases in another class. So we should separate out positive and negative test cases. We will also use data driven testing to run same test with multiple dataset. So if you want to perform same test cases for multiple data, for example, I want to perform this creation, updation, deletion with multiple users of different name, email, etc. So we can perform data driven testing in which we can use Excel sheets as well. Test class instantiates service class and it call its methods. So how the operation occurs? So we will create the test class. Inside the test class, we will instantiate the service class methods. Service class object we will create and we will call the methods from service class. Service methods will return the response object for validation and it will reduces the code duplication and we can reuse the service method across multiple test cases. That is the main benefit of separating service class and test class. And we can also add reporting and logging. So we can log the test steps, API calls, and responses for debugging. It will also integrate extend report to generate detailed HTML reports. We can also capture failure messages and stack traces for quick issue identification. So this reporting and all we will see in next session. In today's session, we will only focus on creating the test cases. So now let's create test case class. So we have already created the test case class inside the com.api.tests package. What is the next step now? We have to create the test method. So I will just first create test method for test create user. This is the test create user method. This is for first API, that is create user with payload. If you see, this is the first request we are going to create. So we have to pass this request payload. And to pass the request payload, we have already created Pojo class. If you see, this is the Pojo class which we have already created. So now we have to just create object of this user Pojo class in which we can pass the test data, that is name, email, gender and status. And it will automatically generate that Pojo object will contain all those information. So let's go to our user CRUD test class. First we have to create object of user Pojo class. I will just name it as user Pojo user payload, that is the object name, equal to new user Pojo. And now in this class, if you see, this is a user Pojo.java. We have created the constructor. Inside this we can pass the name, email, gender and status. Actual values we can pass in user CRUD test.java while creating the object of user Pojo class, so that it will create a user Pojo object which will contain this request payload which we want to send. So now let me just provide some test data here. Let's import that class. from com.api.pojo. We are importing that class package. Now here we have to provide the test data values. So first one is name. So let's say I'm providing Jack. After that we have to provide email. Let's say let me provide jack123 at the rate gmail.com. After that we have to provide gender. Let's say male, and then status. So let's say active is the status. So what this will do? It will create user payload object which will contain all these values. So overall our payload is created now. So this is the payload, which is this user payload object that we have to pass in next step. So I will just show you the next step as well. The next step, that is calling the create user method from user CRUD service class. So for that what we have to do? We have to we have to create the object of user service class. So we will have to create the object of user CRUD service class on a class level. We will create that object on class level so that other methods can also use that object. So let's create one object user CRUD service class. I will just name it as user service equal to new user CRUD service. So it will create the object of user CRUD service class. It will create the object of user CRUD service class, and by using that object, now this object is a user CRUD service class object. And by using this object, we can call all these methods, that is create user, get user by ID, update user, and delete users. So now we can call these methods. So I will just use this object to call create user method. So how to call? User service, that is the object, dot. Now if you see, we can see all the methods: create user, delete user, update user, and get user. So all these methods now accessible. So let's use create user. Now what is the information we have to pass in this method? User payload, because we have to pass the user payload, right? So it is a create method. So it will accept this user payload object. So I will just pass user payload object of Pojo class in this. So it will get that request payload. So this request payload, it is passing to create user method from user CRUD service.java, and it will what it will return. So now it will call the create user method. If you see, it will call this create user method by taking this user payload. Rest of the details it already have: base URI, headers, content type, body, and what type of endpoint it is. All this information is already there. So it will call this method and it will return the response. It will return the response object. So we have to read that response object. So what we can do, we can create one response type of object. I will just name it as, let's say, create res. So let's import the response. So now this is a response object. This create res is a response which will return after calling this create user API. So this response information is present inside this create res. Now we can perform different type of assertions and validations. Let's say I want to print that response. So let me just print that response. Let's say I want to print that response in console. So I can simply use system.out.println and we can simply print like this: response of create user, and we can append that response like this. So create res, we have to use dot because that is a response type of object. So we have to use as pretty string so that it will be printed in our console in readable format. So it will print the response in console. System.out.println, it will print the response. And then we can perform assertions. Now, once you receive this response, what is the next step? We have to check for status code. What is the status code we received? 201. So let's put assertion for 201 response code assert dot assert equals assert dot assert equal and created res. We can fetch the information like status code etc from this response object. Status code created res dot status code. What should be the status code? 201. It should be 201. So it will validate whatever response code is received in this response type of object, it should be 201. If it is 201, then this condition will pass and our test case will pass. If it fails, the test case will fail. We can also validate, we can also perform validation on different response body parameters as well. We can perform different response parameter validation as well. So for that, I will put one validation around name. So whatever name we are passing, so we are passing Jack as a name. So in response, I am checking the name is correctly written as Jack or not. So let me just copy this. Assert dot assert equals from the response to fetch the name. What we can use dot JSON path. So by using JSON path, we can navigate through this response structure. Dot JSON path dot get, and we want to fetch the name value. So I can simply use dot get, and inside this get we can pass what value? So name. So we want to fetch the name. So it will fetch the name, and what should be the value of the name? Jack, that we have passed while creating the request payload. So it should match with this Jack. If both this matches, then the test case will pass. Otherwise it will fail. So that is our create user test case. That is the create user test case. If we want, we can also print the created user ID. For example, because if you see, create user will return the ID of that specific user, and this ID we will require in our next API. So when we are going to call get user by ID, we have to pass this ID. We need this ID, right? In our next APIs for updation of the user, we have to use this ID. For delete user also, we have to use this ID. So for that, what we will do, we will store this ID in class level. So we have to store this ID on class level variable. So I will name it as created user ID equal to, from this response we have to fetch that ID dot JSON path. What is the format of that ID? If you see, it is in integer format. So dot JSON path dot get int, and here we have to pass ID. What it will do? It will, and we can also define it on class level. So let me just define one integer, that is created user ID. So that now this created user ID, once we receive it from test create user API response, we are storing it in this variable. This is a class variable so that it will be available across all the methods present inside this class. So for updation, deletion, getting user ID details, we can use this created user ID. And now let's print that user ID in our console as well. Created user ID. This is basically created user ID. Let's save this. So once we execute this method, it will perform end-to-end test case for testing creation of user. It will pass this information as a test data inside the Pojo class object, so that this Pojo class object will have all this information, and that we will pass in next step, that is user service dot create user. So it will call the service method of create user in which this user payload is passed, and then it will perform the operation. So user CRUD service class will perform the operation. It will return the response that we are capturing inside this response type of object. And once you capture the response, we can perform all the validations and assertions. So we are checking whether status code is 201. We are also verifying that the name which is received in the response should be the one as same as what we have passed. If that validation successful, that means our test case is pass. We can also store the user ID which is received in create user response, so that we can use this in our coming test cases. This is for create user test case. Similarly, we can now create next test case, that is for test get created user. So we want to call the get call by passing the user ID, and it should return the response which will verify get user API response. So again, similar, we have to create another method. So let me just copy this one. What is the name which we have to provide? Let me just write a name, test get user. So test get user. This is a test case for get user method. Again, we have to create, we have already created the object of user service class. So we can simply use this user service class object, and then we have to class call get user method of CRUD service class, get user by ID, in which we have to pass the ID, this ID which we have received in our previous method that we have already stored in created user ID. So user service dot get user by ID method, and in this automatically it is showing you that we have to pass this created user ID. Once you pass this created user ID, it will fetch the response, and that response we have to store in response type of variable. So I'm just naming it get res. So this is a get response which we have fetched. Now by using this get response type of variable, we can first simply print this. So let me just print the response in console. So let me just print this response, that is get res response of get user, similarly as pretty string, and then we can perform assertions. So let me just copy this one. We can validate the status code. So for get user API, if you see, when you call this get user API, this is the response. What is the status code? 200. So let me just verify this 200 status code for this get response object. And in get response of type object, we can also check by using JSON path. This time we will check for email. let's say whatever response we receive, we should compare the email. So what is the email? So this is the email. But what we will do, we will just let it keep it as a name, or we can simply put email as well. So get email. What should be the email? This is the email. It should match with this email ID. Then only this test case will pass. That is the second test case which we have created for get user ID details. But we have missed one more important thing. Whenever we create a test method, we have to provide at the rate test annotation of testng. So let's import the test annotation of testng. We can also provide priority. Priority means which test case should execute first. So my first test case is create user, that should execute first. After that, get user by ID should execute. So I will just put priority to priority equals to 2. So it will call this second method. It will perform the test case for this second method. Now similarly, we can create the test cases for update and deletion as well. So let me just create third test method for deletion. Let me just copy this. Third test method for updation. Third test case for test update user method. Test update user. Now in this what we will do, let me just explain. Same approach. Approach will be the same. We have already created object of user CRUD service class. By using this user service object, we can call update test user method. So let me just create object of user service. By using this user service object, we can create update user method. In this update user method, what information we have to pass? If you see user CRUD service, in the update user, we have to pass ID of that user. For which user ID we want to update the data, and what data we want to update, that also we have to pass. That is again the form of user payload only. So that will be in the form of user payload. So we should have some updated user payload, right? So we cannot use the same user payload. We should have some updated user payload. So what I will do, I will just create, or I will just update some test data. So first, let's update same test data. Let's say I'm just going to update the email. So whatever user we have created, I have to update the email, and also I will update the status as well. I will just update email and I will just update status from active to inactive. So let's create one variable string updated email. Let's say updated user email equal to, now what email ID, so whatever we have created, so here we are passing this email ID, right? So this email ID we have to update. So as of now, let me just write like this, control C, 1 2 3 updated. I'm just passing updated email ID, and then I will just create user pojo class object. I will name it as updated user payload. Updated user payload equal to new user pojo, and here we have to, here we are creating that user pojo updated data. So I will just pass name similar, name same. Inside this email we have to pass this updated user email. Along with that, gender I am keeping the same gender, and status I am changing to inactive. Earlier it was active, but I am just updating the data. For that test user I am just updating inactive as a status. And then we are calling user service dot update user method, in which we will pass the user id. Which user id we want to pass? From the created user. So we have already stored it. If you see, created user id. So from test create user, whatever response we have received, we have fetched the id from that user and we have stored it in this variable, and that same user id we are passing here. So we have to pass user id and updated user payload. So that also we have to pass here. So these two things we have to pass in update user service class. So it will call the update user service and it will return the response. We can simply print that response. So I have to first store that response in response type of variable. Let's say update res. So this is a object which contains update user response, and then we can simply print that response as well. Response of update user, that is update res. So it will print that response in console and it should show the updated data in for that user id. And then we can also perform assertions. So what type of assertions we want to perform? Again, for status code we can perform whatever assertions you want. So for this status code, let's say updated res dot status code. What is the response we receive? If you see our test cases, we have already mentioned there. For update user, response status code should be 200, and this is the response structure we receive. We can verify the email is updated or not. We can verify if status is updated or not. So let me just put that validation. From the updated response json path dot get email, this should be the updated email. This should match with this updated email. And also we can perform for status as well. Updated response json path dot get status. From the response of update api, if you see, we are verifying status should be inactive this time. It should return updated user api response like this, and it should be, instead of active it should be inactive. So I'm just verifying that part. We are passing it here as inactive. So after calling the update api, it should return in the form of inactive only. So that will validate our update api as well. Now the last one is delete user. So now we have to call the delete user. So I will just create one more method. Test delete user, priority will be 4, and here again we have to similar approach. User service class object dot, we have to call which method now? Delete user method from our user CRUD service. In user CRUD service dot java, we have already created this delete user method, which requires id of that user. So whatever your user we have created, we are going to delete that user. So public void test delete user, user service class object dot delete user, in which we have to pass this created user id, and then we can store the response. Let's say response delete type of response equal to, it will store the response in this object. For delete api, if you see, we don't get response body, we just get confirmation, that is resource not found. So what we can do, what is the status code? So let me just first create one user. So let's say I'm just going to create one new user just to show the response body. Let's create this user. Let me just add another email ID. Let's call this API. Okay, so if you see this user created, let's copy this ID. Let's go to delete user and let's paste it here and let's call the send. So once you delete the user, you will see 201, 204 is the status code we have to verify. There is no response body. We can just verify for this status code. So let me just write. First, let's print the user ID which is deleted. So let me just print some console response of delete user for ID. Which ID it will delete? The created user ID, because we have passed this created user ID. Let me print that and we can verify the status code, that is response we can verify by simply putting assertion for 204 status code. Let me just assert that response. Delete response dot status code should be 204. That means our delete operation will be successful. But still it is not full-fledged assertion. What if the status code is coming correctly, that is 204, but due to some error it is not actually deleted from the system? We can still verify the delete. We can still verify the delete operation by calling get user API again by passing this specific user ID. If you pass that user ID in get user ID API, if you get no response, means if you get resource not found, that means the deletion is successful. So what we have to do, we have to again call the user service dot get user by ID, and in this I will pass the created user ID that we have earlier created, then we have deleted, and again we are passing that created user ID in delete get user by ID API. So this time it will not return any success response. It should show resource not found, right? So I will just store the response first. Let's say response verify res, and what we should verify, assert dot assert equals this verify response status code should be dot status code, it should be 404 because that resource is deleted. So status code should come as 404. If it is not 404 and if it is able to fetch the correct response for that user ID, that means our deletion operation is not successful. And we can also validate message as well. So when you call this get user by ID with some deleted, so here we have deleted this user 204 no content, means we have deleted this user ID. I am just taking this user ID again and calling this get user by ID API. What it will return? It will return resource not found. So this message also we can verify. So let me put assertion for this message. Let me put assertion dot get from this message. What should be the message? Message should be resource not found. This is just to double check whether a deletion is successful or not. It will check that message that it should be resource not found. After deletion it should come as resource not found. So that will verify our delete test case as well. Verify response dot json path. Here we have missed json path dot get. Let's save this file. So this will cover our 4 test cases of creation, getting the user ID details, updating the user information, and deletion of user information. So all these 4 test cases are now completed. So we have created object of user CRUD service class, and then we have used these methods as a test methods. Now let's see by execution whether it is able to perform execution of all the 4 test cases, and it should validate all the assertions and all the 4 test cases should pass. So let's validate that. So let me just execute this test case by using right click on this, run as test ng test. So let's execute this test case now. So it should start the execution and it will print the responses in console as well. So first response, second response, third response, and on fourth response it failed. Let's see what is the failure. Expected 200 but found 404. Which API failed? Test get user. Let's check. Okay, so this email seems like already taken. So what I will do, I will change the email ID. Instead of Jack123, let me add 789. Let's save this. And let's execute this test case one more time. It will perform no operation, created user, response of get user, update user, and delete user. If you see assertion error, expected this one, for which test case it failed, 4 test cases run, one failed. So which test case failed? If you see response of delete user, expected this one but found this one. So what we are doing here is, if you see here we are updated, right? So in the update user, we have used updated user email, that is Jack123, updated here. But in console, if you see the console output, it is saying you expected this one but found this one. So that is because of in create user API, we have not changed this one, right? So while creation, if you see in the test create user, we have passed Jack 789. But when we are comparing, when we are assertion, when we are using the assertion inside this get user, we are still keeping it as 123. So I have to change it to some another now. So I'm just adding, let's say 567, and when we are creating again, it should be 567. Let me just save. So I will show you how to handle this situation as well. We have to manually, now I'm just manually changing all the email ID, because if you use the same email ID, it will show you error that this email ID already taken. So currently I am creating for new email ID every time by manually entering it, but we can change that part too. But let me just quickly execute these 4 test cases. So let me first execute these 4 test cases, run as test-ng test. It should execute all the 4 test cases now and it should pass this time. So first create user, get user, update user, and delete user. All the 4 test cases are passed. All the 4 test cases are passed now. Now if you see, if I again want to execute these test cases, what will happen? Since we have hard coded the values, now if you see all the 4 test cases are passed, that means our logic of assertions, etc. is working fine. But when we are creating the test data, we are passing the test data in which we have hard coded this email ID. So next time when we call this same request, it will use the same email ID. But if you are passing the same email ID, it will show you the error. For example, in this create user API, if you created the one user, if you again hit the same request with the same email ID, this time it is created. But if I again hit it, it will show you email already taken. So if I want to re-execute these test cases again and again, every time I should pass some new email ID. Even if you pass the same name, status, gender, if it is same then it is fine. But email ID should be unique every time. Email ID should be unique every time. So for that we can simply change this email ID creation. So what I will do, when we are passing this email ID, I will just split it. We can simply create one split method, or we can, I'm just simply passing jack plus, we have to use one random integer. So email ID which I am going to generate will be like this: jack1234 at the rate gmail.com, jack4578 at the rate gmail.com, jack1239 at the rate gmail.com. So we can use random integer generation. So I will just create one random class object, random class object, random equal to new random. So we have to just import this random from Java util, and by using this random object dot next int method, in this I can pass, let's say, 1000. So it will create some random 4 digits every time. It will give you some random 4 digits that we are appending to this jack. That means jack 1234 or 4578, any random 4 digit will come at every iteration, and that we have to append with again plus gmail.com. So every time it will be executed, it will have some random 4 digits appended with this jack. So the email ID will be jack some random 4 digits at the rate gmail.com. So it will have some random 4 digits at the rate gmail.com. Rest of the things, it's fine if you pass the similar one, but every time email will be generated as one random email ID, so that it will not give you error that email is already taken. Now what we can do is, we can simply store the email which we have received from the create user. So we are passing some random 4 digits. So it will generate some random email ID every time. So we can store that email ID. So what I will do, from the, you can simply create one variable, that is user email equal to this created response dot json path dot get email. So whatever email, random email we have received in the response, that we can store in this user email. So I can define this one string type of variable, user email, that is the created user email. So this email ID is basically one which is created in create user, and that is received in the response of create user API as well, right? So this is the email ID which we have received here. Then we can, where we are verifying this test get user, right? Here we are verifying the test get user, we are verifying for email ID. So when we are using get email, instead of hard coding this, we can simply pass the email ID, that is user underscore email. That is the one which is received from the response. It is dynamic in nature. It will change every time now. So whenever we are calling this API, it will generate one email ID. It will receive in the response of after creating the user as well. And that we are verifying in get user API. So here we have to pass this user underscore email. And when we are updating now, so let's say when I am updating the user, we are just updating the email ID. So what I will do, instead of again passing this email ID, what I will do, updated user email ID should be, I will just replace at the rate with at the rate updated. So whatever email ID we have received in the create user response, what I will I will just use this email ID. I will use replace method. Replace method. Now I will just replace at the rate from that email ID with at the rate updated at the rate. I will just replace that email ID with plus updated at the rate. That's it. So now if you execute this test cases again and again, it will not throw you any error. And one more thing we have to do is where we are assertion, where we are putting this email assertion, again this is not needed. I can simply remove this hard coded value and I can put this updated user email here. So we are comparing that whatever response we have received in update user API, it should contain that updated user email, where we have replacing at the rate from original email ID with updated at the rate plus updated at the rate. So let me just add plus updated at the rate. So let's say email ID which is generated earlier was jack4567 at the rate gmail.com. While calling the test update user, it will modify to jack1234 plus updated at the rate gmail.com. So at the rate is replaced with this one. So now if I execute this test case, again, let's execute this test case. This time it should not throw you any error. Run as testng test. First test case executed, second executed, third also executed, and deletion also successfully executed. If you see, this is the response of create user. It has given you the ID of that user, name of that user is Jack, email of that user which I have generated by using random 3-digit appending to Jack name. So when you pass next integer as 1000, it will generate random 3 digit. If you pass 10,000, it will generate 4 digits. So whatever you feel comfortable. ID, this is the response of create user. This is the created user ID. This is the response of get user. This is the response of get user. In this, if you see, it is showing you successful details. So whatever we have created, that is coming in get user API also. So second test case pass, first test case pass. Then we have updated the details. We have updated email. If you see, we have updated the same email ID jack108. We have replaced this at the rate with plus updated at the rate. So that email ID is updated. And status also inactive. Status also we have updated in update test case. And we have validated that updated email should receive like this and status should be inactive. That means update user test case is also passed. And then we have performed deletion operation. Response of delete user, this user we have deleted. And in the delete use case also we have verified after again calling the delete API. We have verified by calling the get user by ID, in which we have passed the user ID of the one which we have deleted. So that's why we have also verified this 404 status. And inside the response of get user by ID, when we are passing deleted user ID, it should show you resource not found. That also we can print. If you want to print this response, let me just print out that response also. So let me print out that response. Response after deletion of user. This is a get user response after deletion. user. Here we can put this verify res. It will print that response, and then we are verifying from this response status code is 404 and message should be resource not found. Now let me just re-execute this test case one more time. So for every iteration it will create new email id, so that again new email id will be created. It will perform the get operation, it will perform the update operation, and it will perform the delete operation. All the 4 test cases are successfully executed now. If you see, all the test cases, 4 test cases passed, and this is the response of last one after deletion, resource not found. So this is how we can create test class. Inside the test class we are creating object of user CRUD service.java class, and we can simply call this create user, get user, update user, and delete user methods. We are storing the response type of variable in which the response is stored, and we are able to validate and put some assertions as per our test case requirements. So I hope you like this video. And again, in this also we still have some hard coded values. If you are writing the test cases, we should not have hard coded values as such. That we will also enhance in our coming sessions. So our main core logic of creating the test cases is complete. We have created the test cases which are calling the methods of user CRUD service class. We are able to pass the test data. We are able to re-execute the test cases multiple times as well. In the coming session, we will see more enhancement. We will also see how to use Excel sheet to pass this test data. So that's for today's sessions, guys. So far in our framework, what we have done, we have automated these 4 test cases. We have already created property file, how to fetch the property file data. And one more thing, I think I have forgot to tell you that in the previous sessions, when we have created the property file, we have added base URI and token. So if you see the property file, we have config.properties. We have added base URI and token. Here I have added the actual token this time now. In the previous sessions, I had placed some dummy token here. But if you want to execute the test cases correctly, in header, actual token should be passed. So that token I have already explained from where we can get. So that token you can simply get it from GoRest website. You just have to gorest.co.in, click on get your access token. When you click on this, it will ask you for authentication. So you can authenticate via one of the 3 options. Once you complete your authentication, you will see one token. So that token we have to pass in the properties file, actual token that contains bearer keyword, space, and the actual token value. So since it is my personal token, I have just hidden it. But whenever you are doing it, fetch your actual token, then only your API will be called correctly. Otherwise, it will throw you error. Because without token, we cannot call those API. Without this token, we cannot call these APIs. So we have to get this token and paste your actual token in config.properties. And then you can verify your test cases. Then you can re-execute your test cases as many times you want. And let's meet in our next session for further enhancement of our framework. So you have created property file, we have created config reader class, we have also created user CRUD service class, then we have created the test cases class. In the test cases class, we have created all the 4 test cases methods. We have added assertions and validations. We already have pom.xml in our project. In the coming session, we will see about reporting, data driven testing, how to integrate extent report, how to write a base test, how to write data driven test cases in which we will pass the test data from Excel sheets, how to create some utility files, some more additional utilities, how to add logs, how to push the code to repository and running it via Jenkins. So everything we will see in our coming sessions. So subscribe this channel, like the videos. It keeps me motivated. Thank you all. Thanks once again.